What up? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And look at you. You done stumbled upon little OTB Saints, where we bring you all the latest black and gold coverage.
Who are the Saints going to draft? Who's going to be their quarterback? What does the salary cap look like? All that information and more.
Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe.
Look, the NFL free agency is now going to be underway. The trade rumors are swirling. And a lot of big-name guys are requesting trades at positions of need for the New Orleans Saints. Could they dive into any of them? We talked about Joey Bosa a little bit yesterday and whether or not the Saints would kick the tires on that. I want to kind of look at the pass catchers here. So a report came out yesterday that DK Metcalf has requested a trade from the Seattle Seahawks. DK Metcalf, big name, made a lot of big plays, played in a lot of big games. He's been in the NFL for 6 years. He has 6,300 yards and 48 touchdowns. He's explosive. He's 6'3", he's 240 pounds. He runs a 4.3. I mean, he's a freak athlete. Could the New Orleans Saints trade for DK Metcalf? No. Why? Because the Saints are broke. He is just too expensive. He's going to want a new deal when he gets out of Seattle. And look, his current deal, I mean, he makes a lot. He enters the final year of a 3-year, $72 million extension that he signed in 2022. He's set to make over $18 million in 2025. The Saints are at least going to have to take on most of, if not all of that $18 million, and he's going to want to restructure his deal. I just don't think you have the money to sign a DK Metcalf. Would I love DK Metcalf? Sure, but you don't have the money to do it. Also, with Derek Carr as your quarterback and a sketchy offensive line, is it worth paying DK Metcalf at this point? I guess is my main question. Because the Saints offense is not going to be good with or without DK Metcalf. Why are you going to spend $18 million on a guy? Put yourself even further into cap hell. It's going to be even harder to get out of. And you're only going to have him for a season because realistically, you're not going to be able to re-sign him with your current cap situation. He would be a 1-year rental to prove that you're in win-now mode on a team that's not good enough to be in win-now mode. How about his teammate? How about Seahawks wide receiver Tyler Lockett? The Seahawks have released Tyler Lockett. Should there be interest from the New Orleans Saints? Maybe, but probably only in the short term. So I'll explain. Lockett's a little bit older. He's 32 years old. Look, in 10 years in Seattle, he's had 8,600 yards and 61 touchdowns. He's been awesome. He's made a lot of big-time plays. How much longer can he produce, though, at his size, being 32 years old? He's only 5'10". He's 180 pounds. Also, this past season, this was his lowest receiving total since 2017. And he played in almost all of the games. He had 600 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Because he was already splitting time with DK Metcalf as far as who's going to be wide receiver 1 that day. Then they draft Jackson Smith and Jigba, who had like 1,100 yards receiving this year. So he just kind of fell out of favor. He's an older guy. Now, if you need somebody you can line up in the slot that has sure hands, that's still got some speed on him, I think Tyler Lockett's a good option. But again, you would be investing into Tyler Lockett for the short term. And he'd be a lot cheaper than his counterpart DK Metcalf. 1, you wouldn't have to trade for him and give anything up. 2, he's 32 years old. He's coming off of a down year. I think you could get him on the cheap, but what would be the point? I mean, I see the Saints right now as a 2, maybe even 3-year rebuild. Is Tyler Lockett going to be a productive player in 2 or 3 years? And he could probably make some things happen for you this year, but in 3 years, he'll be 35 years old. He'll be a 5'10", 35-year-old wide receiver. I don't know if he's worth signing long term. Now, if you want to bring in a guy and you think you need that much help this year, a wide receiver, I'm fine with a Tyler Lockett because I think you could get him for cheap. Now, the guy I really wanted the Saints to go get has since been snatched up by the Houston Texans. The Jacksonville Jaguars Wednesday announced that they were going to release Christian Kirk. Well, that's somebody that the Saints should be all over, right? I mean, look at Christian Kirk. He's under 30 years old. He's still been a pretty productive receiver. Now, he signed a big contract 2 years ago, and since then, he's been in and out of the lineup. But his last full season, playing in all 16 or 17 games, he had over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. He was really good. Enter, though, Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis, he's a fine number 2, but Brian Thomas proved last year he could be the number 1 option. Christian Kirk's a guy that's going to line up in the slot. He's not going to beat anybody deep out wide. The Saints do need a slot receiver. So when I saw that, I'm like, hey, this is a guy who's 27 years old. He's been productive in both Arizona and Jacksonville. Sure, he's had a little bit of injury issues, but when he's on the field, he's productive. And they're releasing him. He's not on that current contract. You're not going to have to trade for him. Would he take a little bit less money? Well, it doesn't matter now because the Houston Texans have traded for Christian Kirk. That kind of tells us the future of Stephon Diggs. In Houston, I think that's over with. Stephon Diggs is set to be a free agent. Speaking of Stephon Diggs, look, when you look at the free agency for wide receivers, you have Devontae Adams, you have Stephon Diggs, you have Chris Godwin. Those are all great names. And I've heard a lot of Saints fans say, hey, could you go sign Devontae Adams on a one-year deal, reunite him with Derek Carr? You could, but again, kind of like a Tyler Lockett. Now, he's a lot better than Tyler Lockett, sure, but he's over 30 years old. He's going to be very expensive, and you'll likely have him for no more than 2 years. Is your roster good enough to win for the next 2 years? I don't know. We'll see how quick the Kellen Moore turnaround is, but are you going to spend that much money on Devontae Adams when your quarterback is still Derek Carr? You still don't believe he's the long-term answer at quarterback. I think the Saints have kind of made that clear, even though Mickey Loomis says, we're rolling with him in 2025. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I think Kellen Moore is going to want to bring in his own guy. So even if you sign Devontae Adams, him and Derek Carr might only play with each other for 1 year. And let's just call it like it is. The Saints aren't winning anything this year. Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, they're a little bit on the older side. Those two guys are going to want to go to a contender, right? They're going to be, quote-unquote, ring chasing at this point in their career. And I totally understand that. They've been productive players for a number of years. They've never been able to get over the hump in the playoffs. Those guys want to go ring chase, more power to them. But then you also have Chris Godwin, who is now an unrestricted free agent who was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Saints fans know Chris Godwin well. He is a heck of a football player. He is still under 30 years old. He has dealt with a lot of injuries the last 3 seasons. But guys, when he is on the field, he is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Look, I like Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans is a really underrated wide receiver in this league. I'm not sure who was the more talented of the two in Tampa Bay, whether it was Evans or Chris Godwin. Evans was the more consistent of the two, but Godwin, he would have games where he was unguardable. He'd have games where he had 150 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. He did that multiple times. And he's done it with essentially 3 different quarterbacks. Here's the problem with Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and Chris Godwin. A lot like DK Metcalf, they're all flat out too expensive. I don't think the Saints can afford them. They can't afford Chris Godwin because he's probably going to be the hottest commodity on the open market in terms of free agent wide receivers. Because again, he's the youngest of the 3. And yes, he's had some injury issues, but he's only 29 years old. I think he still has a lot of football left in front of him. If he could stay healthy, he's super productive. I think he's going to command probably the most money out of the 3 of the guys I just mentioned. But then also, Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs, not only are they expensive, they're on the back half of their career. We saw Stephon Diggs, even when he was healthy in Houston, was not the same player we saw in Buffalo. Which is part of the reason Buffalo agreed to part ways with him. Devontae Adams has been good, but is he worth signing for 2 years when he's going to ask for a lot of money that you probably can't afford, and you're really not in win now mode? I do think the Saints need a pass catcher, though. And we may have found one. Also coming from the Jacksonville Jaguars, ironically. This news broke last night about 8 o'clock. The Jacksonville Jaguars plan to release tight end Evan Ingram. This is a move that will save the Jags about $6 million a year. This comes on the same day that the Jaguars announced they were trading Christian Kirk to the Houston Texans. So they're freeing up a lot of money. They've actually freed up a combined $13 million against the cap with all the moves that they have made yesterday. Look, Ingram is 30 years old. He signed a 1-year, $9 million contract with Jacksonville back in 2022. When he did that, that was a 1-year prove-it deal. He set career highs, 73 catches, 766 yards that season. They used the franchise tag on him. They worked out a deal before camp. Following season, Evan Ingram caught 114 passes, 963 yards, and 4 touchdowns in the first year of his new deal. Last season, he missed 8 games because of hamstring and shoulder injuries. He finished with just 47 catches, 365 yards. But that was in 9 games. Still pretty productive. If you remember, he's a guy that was with the Giants. He was productive there as well, and he didn't have a whole heck of a lot of work with quarterback-wise. I mentioned he took that 1-year prove-it deal, and it worked out for him with the Jaguars. Would he take a 1-year prove-it deal again? Because this is a team in the New Orleans Saints that desperately need a tight end. Juwan Johnson's going to be an unrestricted free agent. Do you want to re-sign him? Foster Moreau's in the last year of his contract. You still have Taysom Hill under contract, which, like, he's injured, but you can't really trade him either, and he's 35 years old. And also, Taysom Hill is not a traditional tight end anyways. We've seen a lot of people mock Tyler Warren at 9 overall to the New Orleans Saints, which, frankly, I would be happy with. I think Tyler Warren's a heck of a player. But the Saints need so much. If they can get any sort of help in free agency to kind of eliminate one of their needs in the NFL draft, you should do it. Again, he made a lot of money. He's 30 years old. He's been a productive player. But the last time he took a prove-it deal was when the Giants agreed to release him. He goes to Jacksonville. He set career highs. He got a big contract down the road. So he's bet on himself once and it's worked out. Would he be willing to bet on himself again? Because if he is, if I'm the Saints, I'm calling him up today. You need a tight end. You don't have to worry about re-signing Juwan Johnson. You can go get Evan Ingram, who, I mean, I think everyone would agree is definitely a step up from Juwan Johnson. And you can take Tyler Warren off the board. As good of a tight end as he is. And maybe you still want a tight end down the road. This is a pretty deep tight end class. We broke it down the other day. I mean, you got Mason Taylor, who could be rounds 2 or 3. We just talked about him. You got Harold Fannin Jr., who might be there like round 4 or 5. He led all tight ends in basically every receiving category. I get it, he didn't have a great pro day, but he's a guy that was super productive at college. So if you still want a tight end, you can get one later in the draft. But if you go get an Evan Ingram now, you completely flip your strategy for round 1. You can take Tyler Warren off your board. You don't need him anymore. Then you can focus on, do I want to Tetaroa McMillan and further strengthen my receiving core? Or do I want to go D-line? Do I want to go edge rusher? Do I want to go safety? Another position that you desperately need if you're the New Orleans Saints. I'm not saying Evan Ingram's going to be a franchise-changing player, but if the Saints are able to get a 1-year prove-it deal done with Evan Ingram, which we've seen that he's able to take before, and it's worked out for him in the past, I think you got to go do it. Because, again, it doesn't put you over the top, but it makes your picture for the NFL draft a lot more clear.
Wow, just amazing black and gold takes right there, Jake.
I don't think I've ever heard any takes that are better than the two guys that just gave you that take.
And you can keep getting them by going ahead and liking, subscribing, ringing the bell to get notifications when we post. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next OTB Saints.